The air in the federal courtroom was thick and still, smelling of old wood and quiet desperation. From my seat in the back of the gallery, I watched my Uncle Richard, a man whose charisma had always been his greatest shield, whispering confidently to his expensive lawyer. He was the star of this tragedy, and my family, sitting in the front row, were his loyal audience. They shot him with looks of unwavering support. My mother, Carol, a woman who believed peace was more important than fairness, even managed a small, encouraging smile. They were all so certain he was untouchable. Then the prosecutor, a sharp man named Davis, stood up, and the entire room went silent. His voice was like steel. "Your Honor," he declared, "the prosecution calls its final witness. The government calls Deputy U.S. Marshal Clara." For one frozen moment, there was nothing. Just the echo of my name, my real name, colliding with the version of me they all held in their minds. I saw my uncle's head snap. His smug smile didn't just fade, it shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, horrified mask as his eyes found mine across the courtroom. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He had, the ghost of the girl he thought he knew. 2 months earlier, that ghost was sitting silently at a tense family dinner. The scene was a familiar one, my uncle holding court at the head of the table, basking in the glow of his own perceived success. He'd just launched some new real estate venture and was describing it with the theatrical flair of a master showman. Eventually, his benevolent gaze fell on me. "And Clara," he boomed, a pitying smile on his lips. "Still finding your way, sweetie? That's okay." He turned to my friend Davis, who sat quietly beside me. "I tell you what, when you get tired of that little security guard gig, I'll have a spot for you in my mailroom. Get you on your feet." The table chuckled along with him. It was an old wound, one they poked for sport. The college dropout, the quiet failure. My internal ledger clicked over another entry, right next to the forgotten birthdays and the skipped graduations. My mother patted my hand, her touch a silent plea to just endure it. "He's just trying to help, dear," she whispered. But his arrogance made him sloppy. He winked at Davis, the man he saw as my equally unimpressive +1. "You have to know how to move money through the right channels," he bragged, something a college dropout wouldn't understand. The Phoenix Trust, for example. That's the key. He had no idea he was confessing to the lead investigator of a federal RICO case. My uncle laughed, thinking he'd just offered me charity in front of my quiet, unimpressive friend. He had no idea he'd just handed the lead prosecutor for the Eastern District the final nail for his own coffin. To understand the methodical precision of the justice that followed, you have to understand the life they never bothered to see. To my family, I lived a small, undefined life in the shadows. I was the quiet one, the college dropout, the vague disappointment they never quite knew what to do with. That was one world. Then there was the other one, the real one. A world of immense consequence that they couldn't even begin to imagine. The gap between those two realities was a canyon, and I lived my life walking the tightrope between them, totally alone. The difference was never clearer than it was a year ago, at Christmas. The entire family was gathered, the house buzzing with forced cheer and the smell of pine. The center of this universe, as usual, was my cousin Mark, the family's undisputed golden child, who wore his charisma like a custom-tailored suit. He'd just been made a regional manager at some mid-level sales company, and my family was treating it like he'd been appointed to the Supreme Court. My father, a man who measured a person's worth by the predictability of their career path, clapped him on the back, beaming. My uncle presented him with a heavy, expensive-looking watch. I watched the light catch the gold on his wrist, and my internal ledger, the one I never spoke of, began to tally its accounts. That watch wasn't just a watch. It was the coding boot camp I wanted to attend. The down payment on a reliable car I had to save for myself. The decade of money is tight that apparently only ever applied to me. I had just gotten back from FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers. I had survived 21.5 weeks of grueling transformative training at the U.S. Marshals Service Academy. It was the hardest, most meaningful thing I had ever accomplished. I found a lull in the conversation, my heart pounding with a pathetic, hopeful beat. "I finished my training program," I said, my voice sounding small in the loud room. My father turned to me, his expression blank for a moment before settling on polite dismissal. "Oh, that's nice, Clara," he said. "Glad you're sticking with something for a change." Before I could even respond, Uncle Richard chimed in with a sneer. "So, what are you now, a glorified mall cop?" The family laughed, a quick, sharp burst of sound, and just like that, the spotlight snapped back to Mark and his shiny new watch. I was left standing in the cold shadow of their indifference, once again invisible. Now, cut to the reality of my life 6 months later. The world is dark, lit only by the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the grimy windows of an abandoned warehouse. The air is cold and thick with the smell of rust and tension. I'm not wearing a Christmas sweater. I'm wearing 40 pounds of tactical gear, the weight of it a familiar comfort on my shoulders. This was Operation Nightfall. My voice, calm and low, crackles through the team's comms. All teams, we are executing a high-risk warrant. The subject is armed and considered violent. Evans, you have containment on the south exit. I will lead the entry team. On my mark, my partner, Senior Deputy Marshal Evans, a grizzled veteran who saw competence, not a quiet niece, grunts his affirmation. Copy that. Watch your 6. We moved like shadows, a silent, disciplined unit. The plan was solid, but plans are just theories until they meet reality. As we approached the breach point, a side door we'd marked as unused creaked open. A man with a shotgun stepped out, turning directly toward my team's blind spot. There was no time to think, only to act. Gun, left flank, I shouted, shoving my teammate to the ground as I brought my rifle up. The situation was resolved in 2 deafening seconds. No one was hurt. Later, back in the armored vehicle, Evans caught my eye in the darkness. He just gave me a slow nod. That one silent gesture from a man I respected was worth more than 1,000 of my family's empty compliments. It was real. It was earned. That feeling of earned respect was fresh in my mind when my mother called me the day after the disastrous family dinner where Uncle Richard had offered me the mailroom job. Her voice was strained, wrapped in that familiar tone of placating disappointment she reserved just for me. "Clara, you need to understand," she began, skipping any pleasantries. "You made your uncle uncomfortable last night." I waited, saying nothing. "You know he's from a different world, a world of success and big deals. You can't blame him for not understanding your choices." Her pause was heavy with judgment. "You just need to be gracious, dear. It's not that hard." The conversation ended with me promising to try, which was the lie she needed to hear. I hung up the phone, a cold, hard clarity settling in my gut. They would never see me. They had made a conscious choice not to. For years I waited for them to ask a single meaningful question about my life. I finally understood they never would. They didn't respect the person, only the title. So I decided to stop waiting for their approval and focus on my duty. It just so happened my duty was to uphold the very laws my uncle believed he was above. The phone call with my mother was the final click of the lock. The emotional door, the one I had left cracked open for years hoping someone would walk through it, was now sealed shut. There was no more waiting for an apology or hoping for understanding. There was only the cold, clear path of my duty. The next day, I sat across from AUSA Davis in his sterile office, the air smelling of strong coffee and paper. He leaned forward, his expression grim but with a flicker of victory in his eyes. His comment about the Phoenix Trust shell, Davis said, "That's it, Clara. That's the missing link to the offshore accounts. The grand jury will indict." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle between us. Then his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "This is your uncle," he said, his voice lowering. "It's your family. I can assign another team to execute the warrant. No questions asked. No one would blame you." He was offering me an out, a professional courtesy. For a moment, the old Clara, the one who craved peace at any price, considered it. But she was gone. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice as steady and detached as I could make it. "No," I said. "I know his properties, his habits, his associates. I'm the asset with the highest probability of a clean apprehension. This is a federal case, not a family squabble. I will lead the team." From that moment, emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford. It was locked away and procedure took its place. My life became a series of documents, blueprints, and tactical plans. I spread the architectural drawings of my uncle's high-rise office across a large table in the briefing room. Every family story, every boastful anecdote he'd ever told about his kingdom was no longer a source of pain. It was actionable intelligence. His arrogance was his biggest vulnerability, and I planned to use it. He'd feel most powerful, most untouchable in his corner office overlooking the city. That's where we would take him. We codenamed it Operation Glass House. The night before the arrest, Senior Deputy Marshal Evans sat with me as I did the final review of the warrant packet. He didn't ask if I was okay or if I was ready. He didn't offer a single word of sympathy. Instead, he just pointed a thick finger at a schematic of the top floor. "He'll run for the private elevator in the back," Evans stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "It's his emergency exit. Cut it off first." At that moment, he wasn't talking to his friend's quiet daughter or some black sheep niece. He was talking to a fellow marshal. That quiet professional trust was the only validation I ever truly needed. The indictment was sealed. A federal judge signed the warrant. My team was briefed on Operation Glass House. My family was planning a surprise party to celebrate my uncle's deal of a lifetime. They had no idea they were about to have front-row seats to the consequences. Months later, the federal courtroom had become my family's second home. They occupied the first 2 rows of the gallery every single day, a united front of unwavering, almost religious belief in my uncle's innocence. From my solitary seat in the back, I watched them, my parents, my aunts, my cousins. They would occasionally glance back at me, their faces etched with a kind of gentle pity. They thought I was there out of some misguided sense of family obligation, a lost little lamb who didn't know where else to go. My uncle, Richard, believed it. He sat at the defendant's table, looking more inconvenienced than afraid, banking on his dream team of lawyers to dismantle what he called a bureaucratic misunderstanding. He still thought he was the main character. He had no idea his story was over. The afternoon droned on with the testimony of a forensic accountant, a man who spoke in a language of ledgers and shell corporations that seemed to bore even the jury. Finally, Eva Davis rose to his feet. "No further questions for this witness, Your Honor." The accountant resigned, and a brief rustling silence filled the room. Davis straightened his tie, his movements deliberate. He let the silence hang in the air for just a moment longer before turning to the judge. His voice was calm, but it carried an edge that cut through the stuffy courtroom air and made everyone sit up a little straighter. "The government calls its next witness," he announced, "to testify regarding the execution of Arrest Warrant 2, 25 CR 001. 142 JDW, the defendant's attempt to flee, and the chain of custody of evidence seized at the scene." He paused, his eyes sweeping over the jury, then my uncle, and finally settling on me in the back row. "The government calls Deputy U.S. Marshal Clara Jensen." The name, my full title, dropped into the courtroom like a stone in a silent pond. The ripples of confusion were immediate. I heard my mother whisper to my father, her voice a sharp, panicked hiss. What did he say? What did he call her? But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at my uncle. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, clammy gray. His smug confidence, the armor he had worn his entire life, evaporated in an instant, replaced by a raw, naked horror. This was a variable he had never calculated. I was a person he had never truly seen. I stood up, my movements smooth and practiced. The years of feeling invisible had, in an ironic twist, taught me how to command a room with quiet authority. I walked down the center aisle, my polished black shoes making no sound on the worn carpet. I could feel my family's eyes on me, their collective gaze a physical weight of shock and disbelief. I walked past the defense table without a glance, my focus entirely on the witness stand. It felt like walking out of one life and into another. I placed my hand on the book, raised my other, and took the oath, my voice even and clear. Eva Davis began. "Deputy, please state your name and current assignment for the court." "Clara Jensen," I said, my voice resonating with a strength my family had never heard. "Deputy United States Marshal, assigned to the Fugitive Operations Task Force for the Eastern District." For the next 20 minutes, I gave my testimony. I clinically and methodically recounted every detail of Operation Glass House. I spoke of the warrant, the tactical approach, and the breach of the office. I never used my uncle's name. He was only ever the defendant. I described how the defendant had attempted to flee to a private elevator, and how I had personally intercepted and apprehended him, placing him in handcuffs myself. When Davis was finished, Richard's lawyer shot to his feet, his face flushed with desperation. He approached the stand, trying to cast a sympathetic look toward the jury. "Deputy," he started, his voice dripping with false intimacy. "Isn't it true that the defendant, Mr. Richard Jensen, is your uncle?" The question hung in the air. The jury looked at me. My family leaned forward, holding their breath, perhaps hoping for a moment of emotional weakness, a crack in the facade. I took a steadying breath, turned my head slightly, and addressed the jury, not the lawyer. "Yes," I said calmly. "But my oath is to the Constitution, not my family tree." A gavel cracked like a gunshot. "The objection is sustained," the judge said, his voice firm. "That line of questioning is over." I turned to my family. They were frozen, their faces slack with a horrified understanding. The pity was gone. The condescension was gone. All that was left was the devastating public reckoning with a truth they had spent my entire life refusing to see. The college dropout, the quiet failure, was the unassailable authority who had just sealed their patriarch's fate. My uncle had spent a lifetime collecting titles: CEO, philanthropist, visionary. In the end, the only title that mattered was the one I had earned in silence: Deputy U.S. Marshal. The guilty verdict landed in the stunned silence of the courtroom, with the force of a physical blow. My uncle seemed to shrink inside his expensive suit, becoming just a man, finally stripped of all the titles and power he had hidden behind. The aftermath was a chaotic blur of noise and movement, as the marshals, my colleagues, led him away. As I stepped out into the echoing marble hallway, a wall of familiar faces confronted me. It was my family, their expressions a painful mixture of grief and accusation. My mother, Carol, her face pale and tear-streaked, pushed her way to the front. "Clara, how could you?" she whispered, the words trembling with a lifetime of broken loyalties. "He's your family." The rest closed, a circle of desperate, pleading eyes. For a moment, I felt the old pull, the instinct to apologize, to make myself smaller to soothe their pain. But before I could be completely swarmed, a calm, solid presence was suddenly at my side. It was Senior Deputy Marshal Evans. He didn't even look at them. He looked directly at me. "Marshal," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm. "AUSA Davis wants to debrief." He gently placed a hand on my arm and steered me down the hall, away from them. I didn't look back. I just walked forward, leaving my family standing alone and irrelevant in the hall, their questions hanging unanswered in the empty air. I was protected by a new circle now, one forged in duty and respect. 1 year later, the world is quiet. The echoes of that courtroom have long faded, replaced by a different kind of responsibility. I stand in a secure, nondescript room, the walls painted a calming neutral color. Across from me sits a nervous family, a mother, a teenage son, a young daughter clutching a worn teddy bear. They look at me with wide, fearful eyes, their entire world having just been shattered. My demeanor is calm, my voice even. I have learned that true authority doesn't need to be loud. "My name is Clara," I tell them, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I'm the supervisory deputy for the witness security program here. My only job is to keep you safe. Welcome to your new life." I spent so many years feeling like a ghost in my own family, and now my entire career was about helping people become ghosts so they could finally live. Later that week, I'm sitting in a quiet, dimly lit bar with Asa Davis and my old partner Evans. The laughter between us is easy and real. We're not talking family drama or old wounds. We're talking about a difficult case we just closed, sharing the kind of dark humor that only people who walk through the fire together can understand. There are no pretenses here, no need to perform. There is only the deep, unspoken bond of mutual competence and trust. This was my community. This was the family I had built for myself, one mission at a time. It wasn't founded on obligation or blood, but on the simple, powerful truth of having each other's backs when everything was on the line. My phone buzzes on the scarred wooden table, the vibration loud in a moment of quiet conversation. I glance down. It's a text from a number I haven't seen in over a year. "My father." My breath catches for a half second before I read the 2 short sentences. "I saw an article about your promotion. We are proud." I stared at the words on the screen, waiting for a surge of feeling. Anger, vindication, maybe even a bittersweet sadness. But nothing came. It was like reading a message for someone else, a relic from a forgotten archaeological dig. The internal ledger, the one that had kept score for so long, was finally balanced, closed, and filed away in a dusty archive. Their pride, once the thing I craved most in the world, was now just information. I pressed the button on the side of my phone, silencing it, and placed it face down on the table. Evans was in the middle of a story, and I turned back to him, a real peaceful smile on my face. fully present in the world that I had earned. My peace was finally my own. My family believed a person's worth was declared at loud dinner tables and holiday gatherings. I learned true worth is forged in silence and proven by your actions when everything is on the line. If you've ever had to build your own identity when the people closest to you refuse to see it, share your story in the comments. In this community, your accomplishments are always part of the official record.